Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to start this session. We have Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to have the session of the Center for Infrastructure Studies and Environmental Solutions. Today we have a very, very special guest. We have with us Mr. Federico Rampini, who is a very well-known journalist and political scientist. He has written many books on international relations. He is the correspondent of Corriere della Sera in the United States, and he's in a visit in Brazil. And we will have many questions to Mr. Rampini. We have with us Laura Valente. Laura Valente is a professor at Fundação Getulio Vargas, and she's a member of the Center for Infrastructure Studies. We are very happy to have Laura with us. And let me remind you that whoever participates in this debate authorizes the usage of image. And of course, all the opinions expressed here are opinions expressed on a personal basis. They are not necessarily the official opinions of Getúlio Vargas Foundation. Therefore, we can start. We will have a presentation by Federico Rampini about the current world situation, in especially the European situation, and the impacts upon South America, upon Brazil. And then I will ask Laura to pose questions on that regard. We will also have the participation later of Professor Denilde Holzhacker, who is a professor of international relations at the ESPM. And from Milano, we'll have the participation of our friend Alfredo, who is Alfredo Pretto, who is the director of the Association Italia Brasil, Italy Brazil, and we'll certainly have a very good debate and a good discussion here about the major events of the world economy and how in the scenarios, especially looking at scenarios for Europe and the scenarios for Brazil. So the first, I will give the floor to Mr. Federico Rampini.
Thank you very much, Professor Gesner Oliveira. It's a pleasure, honor for me to be here in Sao Paulo today, and especially at the Fundação Getulio Vargas. I have an enormous admiration and respect, both for the foundation and for your own work here at the foundation. So I will delve into some of the major changes that have been produced by the war in Ukraine, which I see as the last shock, the last turning point after several different crises. So it is pushing Europe, the European Union, towards major geopolitical, strategic, economic changes. And I think that some of these changes open opportunities for Brazil too. So, I will try to be very selective. For instance, there is obviously a great deal to talk about security, military issues, but these are not so relevant for Brazil. So I would focus mainly on two aspects of the major consequences of the war in Ukraine. The reappraisal or reassessment of globalization, and the changing, the updating of our energy policies. And both issues can have consequences for Brazil too. I would just spend a few words on the security issues. It is rather obvious to my view that one of the consequences of the aggression of Russia into Ukraine is that European countries overall have become more linked to the United States. The Atlantic Alliance, NATO, has grown more cohesive. There is more unity of strategic intent, and this is a major geopolitical consequence, but it doesn't affect so much Brazil. On energy policies, this is a very, very interesting field. So we are here at the turning point where several European countries have realized how many mistakes were made in our energy policies. We became too dependent overly dependent on a major source of fossil fuels, geographically located in an area that has become hostile to us, Russia. This is a long history, history long in the making. It started in the 70s. Really, it was the Soviet leadership in the 70s when Leonid Brezhnev was the leader of the Soviet Union that started investing heavily in the building of infrastructures like pipelines and especially gas conducts, gas line. So on the other side of the first Cold War, Germany was the major partner of the Soviet Union, and the Germans believed that through economic relations, through trade with the Soviet Union, they could contribute to building, say, a détente, a less hostile geopolitical environment. And so trade was seen as a major instrument of the German foreign policy, starting with Willy Brandt when he was a social democratic chancellor, and on and on and on. So the German model, which is very important to understand any dynamic in the European Union, because Germany is the most powerful, the wealthiest country, the most populous country in the European Union. Germany had like a second youth, a rejuvenation in the 90s. You know, after they had some difficulties in digesting their reunifications after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the reunifications of Germany, they had a lot of economic troubles, and then they restarted their economic engines based on two major factors, on two major recipes. One was cheap Russian gas, which gave a competitive advantage to the German industry. And the second one was a very open Chinese market to German products made in Germany. For a quarter of a century, Germany was the lone country among wealthy developed countries that could have a trade surplus with China because they were exporting so much advanced technology. But then war in Ukraine was brutal shock to Germany and to the rest of the European Union. We cannot count anymore on Russian fossil fuels for our economies. We had engineered a transition to a sustainable economy, to a hopefully a zero carbon emission economy, which was probably based on fragile assumptions. We were talking too easily about a quick transition to a future where renewables would be our main source of energy. So where are we now after we decided economic sanctions on Russia? Russia counteracted with counter sanctions, and now we are almost deprived of Russian gas. We will soon, I think, implement a price cap on Russian oil. So we have to make really an adjustment which is somehow similar to what we did in the 70s, when Europe was hit with the first oil shock, 1973, the war of the Yom Kippur, the first oil embargo. That was a time when we realized all of a sudden that we were too much dependent on the Middle East. Now, and we became, in order to be safer, to have more stable and reliable providers of energy, we turned to the Soviet Union. Now, let's do it again, but the other way around. So we are looking, I think, for a more pragmatic, realistic energy policy for the European Union, which means, when I say pragmatic, realistic, it means geographic diversification. We need to have a lot of different sources of energy in terms of origins. We must look for countries possibly that are not politically unstable or even hostile to the European Union. And the more diversified, the safer we will be. And I think also diversifications in terms of sources. We cannot realistically assume that we will phase out all fossil fuels quickly in the near future. This is not realistic. We will need fossil fuels for a while. So we must look for fossil fuels where they are available, possibly not too expensive, which means going back again to our friends on the southern, on the southern part of the Mediterranean Sea, the Middle East, the Persian Gulf, but also Brazil, of course. So this is where Brazil becomes very interesting for us. It has all of the above. All energy sources are available in Brazil. You have fossil fuels, the pre-salt is a very important source in the future. I think that there is slowly a more pragmatic discourse in Europe where we don't want to demonize fossil fuels in the near future. Even the European Union Commission has adopted recently a more tolerant language, a less religious language on fossil fuels, where, for instance, gas is considered a benefic fossil fuel for a transition to a less polluting economic model. We will need probably to review our policies on nuclear energy, but this does not concern Brazil. Then all renewables are interesting, and I was just speaking to Professor Gesner Oliveira about not only solar, wind, but even the possibility of green hydrogen produced by Brazil. So Brazil is a prospective partner, very interesting, because of its wealth in all kind of energies, and because geopolitically it's not perceived as of course, as a hostile country. It's not in our camp. We know that Brazil has a tradition of foreign policy in, let's call the new generation of non-aligned emerging countries. Anyway, it's the kind of partner that can become very, very interesting, very useful, and even vital for the European Union. Then there is the second topic, the crisis of globalization. This one was long in the making. It didn't start with the war in Ukraine in last February. Probably a history of why and when globalization came into trouble should start with the financial crisis of 2008-2009. This is when, because that crisis, it was, first of all, it was the deepest recession in the Western world after the Great Depression of the 30s. It was originated by dysfunctions and malfunction in the US financial system, but also, interestingly enough, the 2008-2009 financial crisis was coincided with the cycle of inflation in commodities, driven by Chinese demand. So there were 2 or 3 different crises altogether. But anyway, this 2008 is when in major Western countries, parts of the population became disillusioned with globalization. This is when you see, for instance, in the United States, where I was based already at that time, I just left China in 2009 and came back to the United States. So I saw so vividly the radicalization of the political landscape, both on the left and on the right. Because on the left side, you had movements like Occupy Wall Street. And, you know, really the ascent of political characters like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and even the very, very young Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, so the radical wing of the Democratic Party, started with the financial crisis in 2008. And at the same time, on the right wing, the Tea Party movement, which was the genesis of the Donald Trump phenomenon. So, after 2008, 2009, you start sensing this disconnect, that part of the population in the Western countries feel that they have been betrayed by the elites, that globalization is not in their best interest, that they are impoverished by globalization, and especially the competition of China. So you start seeing more violently the effects in 2016, when you have Donald Trump winning the presidential election in the US, and Brexit, which Brexit in the United Kingdom is another kind of demonstration that globalization doesn't have popular support anymore. Then after that, of course, there is 2020, the pandemic, and all the troubles we had with the supply chains, this deep sense of insecurity, which is linked to, once again, to globalization. We felt insecure during the pandemic because too many of the essential products that we needed were being manufactured in China or in faraway places that all of a sudden didn't supply anymore. They weren't reliable suppliers anymore. So all these reasons to be skeptical or even negative about globalization were juxtaposed one after the other. And at the same time, you had this reassessment of the China challenge by the US elites, let's say, on both parties, both the Republicans under Donald Trump, but also the Biden administration and all the relevant people who define Asian policies under Biden, they became much more critical on China and on the kind of threat that China represents to the vital interests of the US. So you had also a kind of a second Cold War in the making. Now, all of these crises have come to an ending or a turning point together with the war in Ukraine, where it is apparent that it is obvious that China is supporting Russia, although with a lot of caveats, with prudence, with a lot of attention to their own national strategic interests, but they are on the same side as Vladimir Putin. So this has accelerated the movement to a decoupling, or at least the aspiration to decouple major Western economies from the Chinese economy. It is not easy. It is, for the time being, I would say it's more a project than a reality, this decoupling, this divorce. I can just give one very simple example is Apple. Apple, which is overly dependent on China for the manufacturing, the assembly of its product, is now starting to relocate part of its Chinese-based production to Vietnam and India. So this is a very small episode of what the U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has called friend-shoring or friendly shoring. After decades of offshoring, first to Mexico, then to China, we are now in a period when a lot of Western multinationals have to think about friend shoring or reshoring their activities to countries that are less dangerous, less unstable, less hostile geopolitically to Western interests. So the example of Apple trying to be a little less dependent on China is interesting, because they are relocating part of their productions to Vietnam and India, but it's small and it's slow. You don't substitute for China quickly, because China took 30 years to build its reliability, its reputation, quality control, quality of the manpower, the labor force, quality and reliability of infrastructure, logistics. But this is the new chapter that we are in. And so that's where Brazil becomes interesting once again. Brazil can be a candidate for several kind of movements. One is possibly a friendly shoring from Western, meaning US or European multinationals, looking for new manufacturing bases in countries that are not antagonist, rivals, strategic rivals, or even hostile to our interests. And another kind of movement can be from China, because even the Chinese can be interested in relocating part of their industrial powerhouse in neutral zones that in the future will not be subject to protectionist measures from the United States or from the European Union. Of course, there are other candidates to this kind of role. There is Mexico, which is very near the United States, and it's already part of the common market with the United States. But Brazil has other advantages in terms of size, in terms of natural resources. So this is my reflections on where Brazil could stand in the new geopolitical landscape that is opening for us, which is seen from a European perspective, it's a dangerous world. It's more dangerous than we imagined until a few years ago. But in other parts of the world, this can mean new opportunities. I would end with just something that is slightly less than a joke. I know that there are wealthy people from Europe buying land and properties in Brazil because in the event of the Third World War, you are far away from where the nuclear missiles will land first. So this is where you, it's part, I would mention this as the last of the opportunities.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Rampini. I think it's very interesting that in Brazilian history, probably we've never had such. The microphone is up. I was saying that probably in the Brazilian history, we've never had such comparative advantage, as you put it, not necessarily because we were able to create dynamic comparative advantages, but perhaps the world has become more challenging in Brazil and perhaps South America. Has become an interesting area for foreign investment in many, especially in energy, as you put it very well. I will just pose some questions. I will turn to Alfredo from Milano in a minute, but I'll pose some questions just for us to discuss later. What would be the prospects for European Union Mercosur agreement? A few years ago, it would be a very remote possibility. Perhaps now it is more promising than a few years ago. Also, perhaps if you could tell us the nuances of the European, the different national countries. You emphasize the role of Germany, but perhaps how France, Italy, and other European countries would differ a little bit from that, and how united really is the European Union. But for later, let's turn, and I'm very curious about Laura's questions in Denilde's comments. Denilde Holzhacker, who coordinates the graduate courses of ESPM, gives us the pleasure to be here with us. And let's turn to Alfredo Pretto from Milano for his presentation, and then I will turn to Denilde, and then we start the debate.
Thank you very much, Gesner. The sound is okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. I wish, first of all, I'm very glad to be here. It's an honor to me to be here today. And my presentation will be the European situation. But first of all, I have to apologize for my English. That is not bad, it's terrible. But I will try to do my best.
No, we don't agree, but you can go on. You are very modest.
Thank you very much. I prepared a little presentation just to speak about what we live here in Europe, because I'm living in Milano and since 2018. And sometimes, maybe in Brazil, we don't have the real sensation of what is happening here. I will pass the second. The problems or the key in Europe today is, of course, the war in Ukraine and the European common defense, the immigration and the social security, the food security, the debt of the member countries and common of the European Union, the energy crisis, the ecological transition, and of course the competitive gap, and forces the industrialization. That is the last theme, but is the most interesting to explain how Brazil could be part of this this solution. About the European common defense, that we know in the 15th, the need for a common defense had led the drafting of the European defense community, but due to the French veto, we don't have today an European common defense in Europe. Now, with this situation, with the crisis in Ukraine and Russia, the European countries, for example, Italy and Germany, they increase increase the budget of the armies, and of course the relation with the United States that now, as Rampini said, we have in a part of the world, we have a United States that is, no, just excuse me, the European need to have more independence from the United States. And this is why in the last month, the 27 members of the European Union have formulated their security interests in a common document. I put here the phrase of Joseph Borrell: Europe must learn to speak the language of power. In this context, the important thing is that many countries in Europe helped Ukraine, and for the to how we say to replenish the stock of equipment given to Ukraine, the increase, then the phase of new Russian threats has prompted the Union and the member states to try to encourage new rapid acquisition of military products. This result will be to have different armaments, making common logistics support, training, and technological updating impossible, which also mean weakening European technology sovereignty, penalizing the European producer of the defense industry. But the first draft of a common threat is underway. The second question in Europe is the immigration and the social security. The subject of the European immigration is a very complex subject, but we can say that in Europe we need immigrants. We need immigrants because we have the age of the population that is getting older. We have many, the manpower of the immigration for many sectors of the industry in Europe, like agriculture and many industries. And this is a fact that is very important. But in other hand, we have the emergency of the coordination between the European country is not always done in the best way. We had in these days, for example, diplomatic tension between Italy and France. And this is one of the questions that we need to solve in Europe. And we have to adopt an common solution to solve the problem of immigration, because in one hand it's necessary, but in the other one, not all the countries are aligned to the same way. And of course, we have Italy, Greece, and Spain that have more pressure because all the arriving are here. The next point is the food security. That I know in Brazil we had more or less the same problem. Fertilizer production is from Russia and Belarus, and now also like the gas, the increase of the prices is attempting in the inflation, and Europe don't have an immediate solution to this problem. Morocco could be one option, Central Asia another one, but for the immediately, we don't have an immediate solution. And of course, the increase of the cost of the energy is also difficult in the production of fertilizing in Europe. And this is another question. But for example, I put here that the increase for the additional cost to the fertilizer was around $20.8 billion. For example, for Brazil was 3.5 billion more this year. And this put, of course, the question of the security of food in Europe, one of the matters important to manage. The other one is the European debt. That is very interesting to see. We can see in this graphic all the countries. Japan is the first in the first circle, but we have, for example, here Italy, Suriname, Sudan, Greece, France, Belgium, Portugal, Brazil is here. This, of course, is the relationship between the product and the debt. And we are around 159%. In Italy, Brazil is today 80%, more or less. In this graphic, we can understand the European countries, the average of the debt is about 95.2%. And if we see that Italy and France has, for example, in the interest that they pay, the spread, a lot of difference. We have 36 in France and 65 in Italy, the cost of the interest. This is another question very important in Europe, because when we talk about the Stability Pact, and we have two matters here, the PNRR, that is the plan, the recovery fund, European Recovery Fund, is an European debt. And we have the European countries that have a national debt, and then we have an institution like the European Union that is making debt to pay the necessary changes in the next 7 years. But the Stability Pact, that is an international agreement signed in 1997 to monitor the deficit and the public debt of the member states of the Union, this amount was discussed. The original pact was about 60%. Today, they are concerning the 90% of the relations between the debt and the GDP. And now we talk about the industry and the productivity, what also Rampini said. For Europe, the cost of the energy cost is really high. And we have, for example, for the first time, the Eurozone trade balance is negative this year. Europe imported more than exported. And wait just a second. And the energy crisis create an economic and political risk due to growing gap between the United States and Europe, and between, of course, the countries of the United Europe. The difference between the cost is not the same in Italy, that in Germany, that in France or Spain. And this affects very much the industry production. For example, the competitive disadvantage result from price of energy between the United States cause enormous losses in terms of production, but above of all, a vast movement of relocation of European industry. That, of course, is not only the cost of energy, is the laws for the environment, is the logistic problem, is the furniture problem, of course, of the materias primas, how we say, the
raw materials.
Exactly. Thank you very much. And now we will talk about the environment laws in Europe. This is not mine. It's an article that I make the traduction between the Portuguese, the Italian in Portuguese, and now Portuguese to English. I have to thank Google Translator, but the European Union is based in three neoliberal principles: free trade without barriers, competitiveness, and the not interference of the economy, of the public sector in the economy. This means that with the new crisis in this year, this is not so possible. It's something that have to change. And other very important question about the European, that the rich market the European is a rich market of 500 million of consumers with more or less the 20% of all the economy in the world. And this is very important because it's necessary to protect this production, to protect this the production, the technologies, and the capacity of Europe to be competitive. But the laws and about the environment sometimes are not compensated with the technologies investment, and this maybe is a very important challenge, to invest more in technologies and to lower the gap between the cost of production and the cost of energy and all the cost of other countries' competitors. This is another about the CO2 emission we can pass. And here we can see the renewable energies in 2020. We can see that, for example, the average of the European Union is 22.1%. Brazil has an average of 83%, if I'm not wrong. We can see the countries: Italy 20%, Germany 19%, France 19%. The discussion here today is about the nuclear. If consider or not the nuclear energy has green energy. But we can see, for example, for the production in Europe, we have Germany with 26% of gas, 25% of petroleum oil, 15% of coal, and only 5% of nuclear, 18% of renewables. Spain is not so different, 23%, 44% oil, 10% nuclear, 15% and 5%. Italy, 42% gas, is one of the countries who most depend of Russia, 36% of oil and coal and hydroelectric, and just only 11% of renewable. Here I have the cost of the energy, just to curiosity. For example, for the industries, Italy is just the worst case, has the major cost of energy in the world. But still that we are the second exporter in Europe. And this can explain how big is the capacity of Italy to invent, to produce, and to be competitive. We have, for example, Brazil that is here, and United States here. Okay, okay, excuse me. Okay, the Atlantis, we talk about, Rampini say about the question, the position to have with United States or with China. And I will not discuss, but I just want to explain how the things are changed. In the 2000, the country who has the first partner, United States, is the blue. And today, these countries have China has the first partner of commercial, the first commercial partner. In 20 years, many things are changed. And this, of course, is important to be considered. This, I don't know if is true or not, but the firepower 2022, we can see United States, Russia, China, India, Japan, and only country in Europe is France, the 7th position, Brazil in the 10th. Okay, now we can talk about Brazil. It was a very ironic image, but okay. For our country, Brazil have a lower inflation than Europe, 6.7%. European have 10.6. A big reserve of United States dollars, 355 billions. This year, the economic growth will be around 2.6%, and the debt in comparison to the GDP is around 80%. We saw that Europe has 95%. The trade balances this year will be extremely positive, 7.3 billion of dollars, and with an increase of 19% between this year and the last year. For the Europe, the situation is a little bit different. They have a deficit of 19 billions of euros, a decrease of 180% compared to the last year, and and this is my modest opinion. The current global and European situation can represent an excellent opportunity for Brazil in the field of industrial, technological, and commercial cooperation with Europe and its member countries. The main competitor in attracting European investment is the United States. In addition to being the sixth country in the world for acquisition of investment, Brazil, compared to United States, enjoying an energy mix composite of 84%, a large availabilities of raw materials, including oil, gas, and water, and a favorable climate, and a 63% of middle income population. Of course, we don't have to, and we have to consider also the carbon credits that we have a very big opportunity with carbon credits. I remember that Brazil produced around 100,000 tons of CO2 in a year, and the water reserve, 20% of the reserve worldwide. And of course, the challenges are greater investment in technology, infrastructure, social policies, and education. And I finished my presentation, and sorry again for my terrible English.
No, Alfredo, it was a very interesting presentation and with interesting statistics. Very rare to see Brazilian inflation lower than European inflation. This is a very rare fact.
And the debt also,
history.
If we consider, we have
and
to
also the debt. No, so it's quite interesting. And now I will turn the floor to Denilde, who can make her comments. I have the pleasure to be with Denilde a few times. We hold a debate on television, and she always has very interesting questions, very stimulating questions. And after Denilde, I'll turn to Laura, who will, and she will certainly propose very good points too. So Denilde, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Gesner. Thank you for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be here with Federico and Alfredo and Laura in his panel. So Alfredo, I do the same. I just my English is really terrible, so excuse me about about my
Not worse than mine, I'm sure.
we compete. So, but I want to talk about. So, you talk about Brazil and how we are in this moment. Also, Federico, and for us in the Brazilian perspective, we have really a moment of change, because we now look for the new government and Lula's government. So, and that makes for us some questions. What will be in terms not just about energy policy, but also international positions in the world and the foreign policy. Because now we really think we have a special moment to change some policies we had the last 4 years if the Bolsonaro government. And I will be quickly, because I want to make space for the debate. But first, in terms of energy policy, I think, and in my here I talk about Lula's more than Bolsonaro, because now in this transition. But in terms of energy policy, most of the discussions in the new administrations involve the price of the gas and the oil, and how this is impacting Brazil, and how we manage a new policy in terms of Petrobras, the big company we have. So that's one point, and we need to think how will be this new policy in terms of the price of the gasoline and how this impact the economies in terms of general. The other thing about energy, it's how incentivate new renewable project, because we have a mix compositions in terms of energy, but how increase others energies projects, especially solar and wind. And the government need to have a policy in this area. So Brazil don't have the same problems that we see in Europe or in US, but we need to make clear which policy we want. And that is a big question for the new administration. The other questions about the new administration, it's and affect one important message, international message. It's about the climate diplomacy, because we really now have a new perspective in terms of which we be part of the agreements, international agreements. We want to make more, be more proactive in these discussions, different from Bolsonaro policy, but we have a challenge to how we do that if the agricultural and the agribusiness process. So the questions about the preserve all forests, it's important. We know it's important for us and for the world. Amazon, it's really I think it's a priority in terms of how we manage the forest and the policies in terms of not deforestation, but how this will be in the dialogue if the sector, the agribusiness sector. And that is a big issue for this new government, because impact our trade international trade, impact for the world in terms of the crisis, how you talked, Alfredo, about the food crisis, and the prices of the food in Brazil. So it's other thing we need to discuss in this administration. And the green economy, it's really important to discuss and how we implemented this policy. So that's so in terms of discourse, in the international arena, we really think it's we have a positive proposal. But when you look for the discussion in Brazil, we really don't talk about some important and difficult topics in terms of how to these local and especially for the impact in the economy. So that other thing I want to put here for was discussed because it's really a contradiction, and sometimes we see that we really try to discuss in some moments, but it's still far away in terms of which policy this new government really implemented when we talk about this. That it's important not only because we in a new administration, but because it reflects how the sector is organized in Brazil. Part of the Bolsonarista supporters come from this group, and that impact also in the Congress and how the new government will negotiations support and policies in other areas. So it's more complex than just we talk about one topic, or it's not just the environment policy or the climate policy, but also they want impact in the others' perspective. And I want to, in this all perspective, we really think that the administration, the Lula administration, really it's possible to implement a really important green economy. That is the expectations about this green economy is really high. Marina Silva makes some proposals during the campaign. So we imagine that this will be part of the new administrations, but because it's so we have so many conflicts, so many discussions in terms during these transitions, that it's possible this policy, which is considered is really important, become a secondary in terms of the all we need to look. So, and the world think, and most of the international arena think it's possible we just implementing this new, the beginning of the government. But in my perspective, it's really complicated to implement now, because this scenario and the internal difficult for the new government. If you look in terms of Amazon, I think the best shot we have is the policy will be not just about federal perspective, but also we implement if the governors and in cooperation with the other countries, the Amazon countries, so Colombia, Peru, Bolivia. If we just look at just for the federal, it's really difficult. But if you have other perspectives, I think it's possible we have advanced in this area. And that perspective, it's not that so clear for me in this moment when we discuss about foreign policy. And that try to be more quickly. In terms of other thing, I really, it's important to us, international arena and in foreign policy. It's about how the government, this new government, will be capable to stay proactive and participate in multilateral areas, but have to implement a new policy, that international policy that mix interesting between US and China. That's the challenge for this new government. In the world, it's unstable, in a crisis, and make positions is really high. How we can stay participated and have a voice in international arena, but make a positions neutral that we doing or did the last year. So it's another challenge for this government. So, and I believe if in terms of the logical of the international arena today, Brazil be suffer press not just about for US. And they start to become more clear. US want Brazil engage in the international arena, but also we have really a good relationship with China. So for us, the world, this moment, it's really complicated because we need to make positions, and that position could be to become more aligned if one country or another one. And that is really complicated for the Lula government because they believe it's possible Brazil stay in the middle and have a capacity to become not just a negotiator in terms of logical, but also have more possibility to increment our position. So that another, so in terms of international, I think, in my view, we have more complicated situations. We have possibilities. We have a really good opportunities, but also we have to do some decisions that could be important in long terms, and that especially the position, the foreign policy, it's a really trick for us. It's not, we believe, or Lula's government believe that it's possible to do something like we did during the first and second government in the beginning of the century. But now we have a really different scenario, so that it's complicated for us to create the same options and make the same policy. What is important for us in this world? I believe we have some possibility if you work together with other countries in South America that make us more powerful, capable to have a discussion in terms of international, and we can coordinate and the position of the other countries. It's not because we are big and we have so resources and also an important economy, but because the other countries believe us can do this kind of possibility and have the possibility to be the country representative for the others, especially in South America. And we have a possibility because all or most part of the country have the similar positions in terms of policies and ideological views to Lula government. So that make easy. We have more possibility to become a country if positions in international field. So in terms that positions is more for us. It's really, I think, it's really a great possibility for us if you want to be more participated and have some capacity to influence the international world now. If not, we will be the country that will be pressed for others, big powers, especially US and China. So I think that it makes us important to discuss and then represent a new view. Also, for finish, that the perspective of a Lula government, it's important also the dialogue in terms of South-South, so that other thing it's important for us, and that make us a country that have possibility to explore others regions. So the questions, and many PT's people from PT told me, it's why you look China, that just the US and the European countries, and not we start to look Africa and South Asia, and that make more a new organizations of the world. So that perspective, the new international order, and a new perspectives, I believe will become more important for this government than the new government, than this government, the Bolsonaro government. So in terms, for finish, and I really say sorry for my confusion, but what I want to say is this: we have really opportunities. I believe you have we can be part of these new discussions about the globalizations, also the climate change, but also we have really problems, domestic problems, and the new government need to look these situations to answer international perspective, and that it's possible. We have really high expectations, but the reality will be really complicated for this government in this, I believe, in the first years or the 2 years for now. So sorry and thank you.
Thank you very much, Denilde. I think that Denilde reminds us that it's a very complex situation. We were talking before that Brazil somehow will feel the pressure from our major market, China, and also the pressure from the United States. And it's not easy in this new world to be absolutely neutral So this is one problem. Also, the problem of the Amazon. There's not a simple solution to the Amazon. So there, you have to really have a very wise policy regarding the Amazon, and of course, it will not be a trivial situation. Although, as Alfredo pointed out, our inflation rate is relatively low, our debt situation, at least in the short run, is okay. The fiscal situation is quite fragile, and so that's a challenge. But I'll ask Laura to pose a question, and we give the floor to Rampini to react to the many questions Denilde raised, Alfredo raised, and then we'll have some time to debate with the public. Laura.
No, thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor, and also to join this panel. I actually have more questions than anything, because after listening to what you had to say, I'm overwhelmed, honestly. So one thing that came to my mind while you were speaking was basically that between the three of the speakers, I think they complemented very nicely the whole topic. So I'd like to congratulate on the choice of speakers and of the theme here. Well, I think I should only ask one question. Maybe you could share the answers and use it as a debate. But one thing I felt was missing a bit was the other developing countries that you brought in. So the first thing that I thought when you were speaking, I was wondering what would be the role of Africa in the sense of coming in as an option for these countries, as providing raw materials and energy and resources. And I'd like to hear more about that. I think it's really important that we talk about that. And this links, I think, to the issue of immigration, which I think is immigration and also other populational issues. The fact that we are increasing, even though we are increasing less than what was expected originally, there was expectations of more populational growth. And how does that impact this whole crisis, all of these crises? Because it's a crisis of crisis. I mean, when you talk about this, and after all, Brazil isn't looking that bad. I was surprised. What Alfredo brought in about the numbers, figures are really important, because once you puts things in perspective. No, we're always complaining here about many things, and something that is always missing from the climate discussion. I'm an environmentalist, and I work with environmental policies. So one thing that I see often spoken here in Brazil is that we are one of the 10 largest emitters of carbon dioxide because of the deforestation. But in reality, we are responsible for 3% of the emissions in the global balance. So I don't think that it's so much an issue of poverty as it is an issue of affluence. I think climate is a consequence of affluence and consuming more than what we have. So all of this only makes me think that there's not much solution ahead, but probably there is. So I'd like to hear the speakers, if they could, link these issues, because I think they were brought in very nicely. Thank you very much.
If I may ask Rampini, please, to perhaps what is the prospect of Mercosur European Union agreement in the next few years? What is the European expectation regarding Brazil's role? Would you react to that?
Yes, of course. I wanted to reply briefly to your comments and your questions, and then I'll try also to but I'll be brief. I have not grown more optimistic on the prospect of the EU-Mercosur agreement, and I will explain why. So first of all, let me mention there was your other question, remark, comment on the evolution of the European political situation. I think one of the consequences of the war in Ukraine is that the center of gravity of Europe is shifting again towards northeast, because you have seen the importance of a country like Poland, very, very in tune with the United States strategically on how to deal with Russia, because you have seen Nordic countries like Norway and Finland entering NATO. So I think that really we have a Europe that is now a little more northern and northeastern than before, which does not bode very well for the attention towards Brazil and South America in general. Another thing that can work against better prospect for the EU-Mercosur treaty is that immigration is strengthening right-wing, very conservative parties in several countries in Europe. Look at what has happened recently in France, where yes, Emmanuel Macron has been re-elected, but it's a little bit similar to the situation for Lula here. Emmanuel Macron is president again, but the Congress, the French Parliament, is more to the right than Macron himself. So he has to deal and to compromise and to mediate constantly. And one of the results is, for instance, you have France advocating food sovereignty, souveraineté alimentaire, which is not a good thing for the Mercosur agreement. If you think in terms of
food export.
Yeah, exactly. Other food export. I mean, France wants to be the food exporter, and Italy, interestingly, Italy with the new right-wing government is also proclaiming that it wants to defend food sovereignty. So we have these movements to the right in Europe, which is very much linked to the immigration issue. And they are also in favor of protectionism, and especially agriculture and food protectionism. So the other point on the Mercosur European Union agreement is European countries, European governments are very distracted. They really don't understand the risk of losing Brazil to China. Although it's a very, very, you know how it's real, but it's not a topic that really figures among the first 10 or even 20 priorities in any political agenda of any European government. Maybe not even the Spanish government, which used to be, or the Portuguese, which used to have a special attention to the South American continent. So I'm not very optimistic on that. Then I will add a couple of remarks, brief. One is there's another topic that may be relevant to the European-Brazilian relations in terms of energy policies and the future of our energy system, which is we in Europe risk going from a dependency on Russian fossil fuels to a future dependency on China for green technologies. I mean, we are overly dependent on China for photovoltaic panels, solar panels. We buy them from China. China, through a unfair competition and dumping exports, China was able to bankrupt our domestic industry of solar panels. So we are buying them from China, as well as we are buying electric batteries for electric vehicles from China, or the components of electric batteries from China. So this is, why is it relevant for Brazil? Well, China is the dominant provider for all minerals that go into electric batteries, lithium, nickel, cadmium, but these are not extracted from China soil. They come, a very large percentage comes from South America. So it's mostly, until now, as far as I know, it's mostly Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, and Peru. But I guess there is a potential for Brazil. So we Europeans, we will have to look for new sources of supply for all kind of components for green technologies, and for new localizations for manufacturing for these technologies. I mean, we cannot really find ourselves 10 years from now in a situation where all our solar industry depends from one supplier, and that supplier is called China. That's why I think it would be very useful for European countries to relocate both mineral supply and or the manufacturing of green technologies in a country like Brazil.
That certainly gives an opportunity for Brazil in terms of reindustrialization in different types of partnerships with other countries. Alfredo, how do you react to those questions? You were so active in the Italia-Brazil Association. How do you see Italian investors and European investors in general? How do they see Brazil? How can the Brazilian image improve? As Denilde was saying, that the Brazilian image in the world was in a way not a very positive one, especially associated with the deforestation. What do you think, Alfredo?
I wish to answer, first of all, to Denilde some comments about the question. I'm optimist with the new government, as I was with the actual government, because I think Brazil has today internal problems of political question. The country is divided, who wants Lula, who wants Bolsonaro. But the health of the country is good, is a very good. And Lula, of course, you did a very good opinion that the world has changed. It's not the same world that was when Lula was president. But with all defects that Lula can have, he's a very good negotiator, and he has a very good reputation outside of Brazil. And this will be good for the Brazilian position, as how it was good also Bolsonaro. He did a good international political, maybe not for the media, but for business, for investment, for international agreement, for respect also. And Lula, I think, will do the same. The question about the investment is very important, but we have a big difference. We Brazilians have a big difference with many countries in the world. Our balance with China is positive. And when you read, and I'm not sure of that, is my opinion, maybe I'm wrong, that Brazil needs more China than China Brazil, I'm not so agree, because you can change telephone one time per year, but you have to eat and you need materials to produce all the time. And I think the position of Brazil is very good. And with Lula in the South America, with all the other presidents that are in the same current and the same political team, club, I think this could be a good way to accelerate maybe not to accelerate, because I am agree with Federico, of course, but in the matter of in European Union agreement with Mercosur, the things are changed. Today, Europe needs South America, and maybe South America don't need so much Europe. And why? Because Europe and United States together is what we trade with China. This is a force that Brazil has. The otherwise, in the diplomatic relation, United States is the first country for Brazil, always has been. And Europe is a very important. We never has to forget that we have more Italian in São Paulo than in Rome. We had the German people, we had Holland people, we have Swiss immigration. Brazil is really the continuity of the European culture and the evolution of the European culture. And I think this will be extremely positive for the country. Of course, will be difficult to Lula to govern the first year, but not impossible. And things change it. And I think we are in a good position. About the roles of Brazil in the diplomatic world, we always are a very important country. Today, we are more, but not with prepotence, because we have what the world needs. But I agree, of course, with the question of the alimentary security from Europe, the relationship between, for example, the relation between France and, this is for answering the question of Gesner. Today, France will have an advantage with the relation with Lula, because Macron and Lula, they are not friends, but Macron did apoyó, how we say, supported Lula. But the French investment in Brazil are more services. The Italian investment is more industrial, technology. And I think we have a lot of work here to promote Brazil, but the wrong image or the bad image that the country has is between the media and the political people. The industries, the managers, the population loves Brazil and know that Brazil is very, very important. We don't have to forget that Italy is the second investor in Europe, the second exporter in Europe, and many of the products that came to Brazil from Germany are produced in part in Italy. And I think this will not change.
Well, let me ask if there are other questions, perhaps, that we take advantage. I know that it's getting late, but we have to take advantage of Rampini's presence here, Denilde's presence, and this conversation with Alfredo. It's even later in Italy at the moment. Perhaps almost midnight in Italy. So let me ask if you have any other questions to our visitors. Saqueto, Vicente, Rubens, any questions? Amalia, one point from Denilde.
I want to add one point about Mercosur and European agreement, because I think it's really hard we have agreement close so in the next year, or the Brazilian government has a really expectation, the new government have a real expectation that we can advance and close the deal. But Argentina has really strict points about some parts of the agreement. So it's not just European countries have questions about how the deal was negotiated, and some parts we have questions also, especially in Argentina. Brazil less, but Argentina has more questions. So that make difficult to have agreement in the next year. Probably if you start a new negotiation. And the one point in Brazil that the agricultural sector, it's really against is negotiation about environment and the additional points that the Europeans want to include. So that make complicated for this process. And I'm a positive person, and I really, Alfredo, want to be really positive about the new government. It's not but I think we have so many problems in terms of negotiation. It's not only about the situation, economic situation, or because the country is divided, and we have some problems now, institutional problems, but because the Congress, it's really have some not only questions but policies that will be against the new government views. So in terms of we have really part of the Congress that it's against environment, and they think it's important to keep some policies that Bolsonaro did. And for that, when we look this scenario, it's really complicated for Lula, and he need a big coalition to make his policies and implement policies for the next years. So for that, it's my position. Look so pessimist, but I'm really optimistic. I think we have an opportunity to change and make different. But in terms of pragmatical, we have problems, and we need to talk about these problems.
I will just do a provocation, but sometimes no government is a good government.
Let me ask you any more questions. There's a question there, Gabriela.
Hi, everyone. My question would be to all the panelists, including Mr. Alfredo. You were mentioning that one of the issues that have been talked about in France, especially about food security, and that has always been used. The argument for this has always been the argument that has been used has always been that, well, in countries like Brazil, although there is an attempt to be sustainable, it is very hard to trace the supply chain structure, and the supply chain structure is responsible for deforestation, and that is the reason we perhaps, the Europeans, can trust Brazil. But with the return of Lula, one argument is that there might be more fiscalization through jurisdictional approaches, with the fiscalization organs being strengthened, or through bottom-up approaches through civil society organizations. So do all of you perhaps believe that this argument of food security will continue even if there is this shift in Brazil's environmental policy? Will the argument remain the same, or will it weaken the argument? So yes, that would be my question.
A very good question. I turn to Rampini. How will Europeans react to the new Lula's approach to environment?
It's a very good point. I think that Lula has certainly a capital of goodwill in Europe that he might spend well, and this might provide dividends also on the topic of food security. Food security obviously has very different aspects, and one you might say, you might argue today that after what happened in Ukraine, when all of a sudden supplies of cereals, wheat, maize, etc., were interrupted through the Black Sea. We did not receive any more supplies of cereals, neither from Russia nor from Ukraine, that we will need in order to protect our food security. We will need stronger relationship with South America and, of course, Brazil. So this might be an argument in favor of the Mercosur. But very often when you talk food security, it means security of your own farmers. First of all, there's an electoral constituency, so the French farmers or the Italian farmers. Then there are all kind of not only environmental sensibilities, but so-called health issues like GMOs, genetically modified organisms. These are very often cover up for just excuses for protectionism, but they are popular in Europe. And then there is the deforestation issue that you mentioned. Yes, we should be very realistic. I think all of us that the deforestation of Amazon will have in the next future as its main driver demand from China. It won't depend on us and maybe not even on you. It's how much China wants to augment, to increase its consumption of soy or its consumption of wood. That will be the main driver of the deforestation of the Amazon. But anyway, you make a good point that because Lula is on average more popular in Europe, and certainly a lot of, I would say a majority of European governments have a very positive attitude towards Lula, and they consider Lula being environmentally friendly. They will try to help him.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I would have many more questions, but I think for a Friday night, I think it's about time that we end our debate. But I think, Alfredo, as our friend and partner we want to have more webinars like this, in hybrid events like this. I think that we should, I was telling Rampini that we would love to have him more often in São Paulo and make sure that perhaps we can have a mini course on international relations. Of course, always with partnership with the ESPM, with Professor Denilde, in our Center for Infrastructure Studies and Environmental Solutions. I think, Alfredo, we can finish here, and certainly we can have a very good and rich agenda for 2023. I think many issues here that were raised about international trade agreements, about the Amazon, about the political scenarios for the next few years. All those topics are of great interest for all of us, for all the countries here. So thank you very much, Alfredo, for this event. Yes.
Just a minute. I know I want to thank all of you, but a really special thanks to Federico, because here in Italy, in Europe, and United States, is a very, very important journalist, and is an honor to be with you all, and to know that he came to visit Brazil, and he went to my city, Rio, and now São Paulo, and I'm really, it was a really pleasure and honor to me, and thanks all you, Gesner, Denilde, Laura, and very, very special thanks to Rampini, to Federico.
Yes, I echo that. Very special thanks to Federico Rampini. Very special thanks to Stefania, who is always here. We hope that you have a nice stay in Brazil, and that you come many more times, and we certainly have a very good agenda to discuss. Thank you very much to all of you who were here, who accompanied through internet, and we'll soon have the program for 2023, and we would love to have you here more times and share with you a number of topics which Laura considers to be excessive, but we'll make sure that we'll cover all of them. Thank you very much.